The pace of change has never been faster. Technology is rewriting the rules. Automation is shifting how we work. Innovation is no longer optional. At AIM B2B, we help businesses move with clarity and purpose. Because progress isn't about keeping up, it's about aiming higher. We partner with visionaries in AI, clean energy, healthcare, manufacturing, technology, and beyond. Together, we challenge convention, unlock opportunity, and build what's next. We simplify the complex, turn data into direction, and craft stories that connect across industries, borders, and cultures. Our approach is intentional, human, always moving forward. Because growth isn't static. It's motion, it's mindset, it's better. At AIM B2B, we help you go beyond what's expected and into what's possible. Aim higher, go beyond, always forward.
I'm Robert Held. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Custom Media. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our annual content marketing survey and AIM B2B brand launch. I started Custom Media in 2008 with a bold vision to become a leading publisher, and we achieved that. We launched the British Chamber of Commerce in Japan's magazine, Acumen. We went on to launch or handle the magazines for the American Chamber, the Canadian Chamber, the only publisher who had all three titles at any given time. And we also won the award to be the exclusive advertising agency for the Tokyo American Clubs magazine, In Touch. And while we were doing all of this, clients often came to us with marketing requests. Can you design our print brochure? Can you launch a website? Can you publish a video for us? And so on and so forth. And over time, we started to become a marketing production company. And as we continue to grow, we started to do media buy, large-scale media buy. We started to do PR and so on and so forth, which was good for growth. But as we started to keep growing, we needed something special, something different, something that makes us unique. And during our annual team meeting a couple of years ago, my team asked me, Robert, so what are we? Are we a publisher? Are we a marketing production company? Are we a full-service agency? And that really gave us some food for thought. It got us into gear. It got us excited about what should we be. So after a lot of meetings, brainstorming sessions, workshops, and so on and so forth, we decided that, we needed to do some serious soul searching. And we got on this journey to define who we are. And we had to do all of this at the same time while keeping our business going and trying to stay afloat during the challenging time of COVID. But I'm really so glad that we did it. We took the time to redefine who we are. And it became very clear to us from the earlier on as we started to do this exercise that we excelled in helping global B2B businesses to share their stories and succeed in the Japan market. And from that, AIM B2B was born. But you may ask, what is AIM, right? Well, AIM, according to a dictionary, it's a plan and an intention to achieve a goal, often something bigger. But for us, from our soul searching, we found that it was clear over the years that we had developed a process, a three-step process, adapt, implement, and maximize, which had served us very well to service our clients and to help them to achieve their goals. And as we were doing this research and discussions, the brand was right there staring us in the face. Adapt, implement, and maximize. And from there, AIM B2B was born. Today, we are an award-winning agency focused on B2B, helping brands to share their stories in a market that's very complicated. And we do this by connecting strategy, creativity, and execution. We take an integrated approach, providing 8 core services strategy, branding, PR communications, content and creative, digital experiences, paid media, demand gen, account-based marketing, and technology. So you may ask, so what's all this got to do with a survey? Why do a survey? B2B decision makers rely on content to make informed decisions, and content is such a critical component to their process. Yet globally, content marketing surveys show that 50% of B2B marketers find it difficult to make a scalable model to create content. So last year, we decided that we needed to do something about this to understand the Japan market, understand how content is produced in Japan, what are the challenges B2B marketers have, and then publish these results so that we can better service our clients. And from that, we decided to launch the survey. This year, the survey was conducted between April 15 and June 15, over a 2-month period. We spoke with B2B marketers in various industries. The top industries were technology, professional services, manufacturing, consulting, and finance, in various roles, from manager and director levels to VPs and C-suite executives, who represented various company sizes. And today, to discuss the report findings with me here, I'm delighted to welcome back Stephanie Roberts, who is the Chief Communications Officer at Hitachi Industrial Equipment Services Systems. Stephanie was recently promoted to this role. Congratulations. She brings nearly 15 years of global communications experience, having developed and successfully executed strategies in PR, executive communications, internal employee communications, crisis communications, social media, CSR, and much more. She has spent more than 7 years working in the Hitachi Group and was the first expat sent to HIES headquarters in Tokyo. Stephanie holds a Master's of Science degree in Communications from Northwestern University and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Communications from DePaul University. I'm also delighted to welcome back Ross Robery, a Japan communications guru and personally a mentor of mine. Ross is the Senior Managing Director and co-head of Group Corporate Communications at Nomura Holdings. Ross has observed Japan while living and working here for over 4 decades. Starting his career in finance in Tokyo during the early 1980s, he later moved into PR and communications, holding senior roles at Gavin Anderson, which is now Creab, Pratt, and he also headed Edelman's business in Japan for over 10 years until 2020, July. Prior to joining Nomura in October 2023, he was a freelance consultant to a number of firms on their Japan business strategy. He serves on the board of TEL, a suicide prevention and mental health NPO, and was a visiting professor of Asian marketing at Toshisha University in Kyoto for several years. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ross and Stephanie to the stage. Thank you, Stephanie and Ross, for joining me this evening again to discuss this year's content marketing report. The first thing we always ask our surveyors is strategy and how important a role strategy plays in content marketing. And compared to last year, we found that 10% of the respondents said that they have a content marketing strategy. What do you think is behind that? What's happening? Are teams just shifting focus, or is there something else bigger happening for the lack of content marketing strategies as a part of their B2B marketing?
Sure, I think that's a great question. For me, at least from my perspective, I think maybe people are really trying to understand what's happening with AI, because it keeps changing on basically a daily or weekly basis. And I know I'm more on the communication side, but I know in my circles and with communications peers, there's a lot of talk about how now earned media is playing more of a key role in AI search, especially. So now maybe people are putting a little bit more focus on other areas like earned media or paid media or you name it. But I think from my perspective, I think it just comes down to AI and people just trying to figure out what really is the best thing to do right now?
Yeah, I think there may be three things that are potentially happening here, and one of them is exactly as Stephanie has pointed out, that we are definitely seeing an increase in the volume of conversation around earned media and the changes that AI is going to bring to our lives. I also wonder if a second thing that may be happening is as content marketing, people have been talking about it now for a number of years, and as a number of years go on, you always see that some people decide, oh yes, this is great, let's go out and have some of this, and then they try it, and it turns out to be a little bit more difficult or expensive or drag on resources, and we discussed this a lot last year, the resourcing issue. And so they tend to sort of fall back a little bit and try and do something that's perhaps a little bit more maybe superficial or easier. And the third one is, the same one, as time passes, I think the definitions become granular and more defined. And so people may be thinking, yeah, we do some stuff, but could we really say that we have a content marketing strategy? We're doing some tactical stuff, and so maybe that's going on as well. So I think that, to my mind, maybe there's those three things that are happening in this number.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say, there's a lot of focus on earned media, and we know in a market as Japan, earned media is really hard to, receive and to build that trust with reporters and journalists in the media, and also the trust in media is also quite low. So what strategies do you do to convince or engage with the media to get that coverage? Is there anything you do unique or that you can share?
Well, for us, I think it depends which region. I mean, I know here we're talking Japan, so our PR efforts in Japan are very different than globally. Typically, we're more proactive and not so dependent on the press release. But I think here still, we're still predominantly on the press release, but we're trying to do more of the proactive, finding those unique angles, but we're still a work in progress there.
It's a really interesting point that you raised, Robert. I mean, when I started out in public relations, the mantra was, the reason that public relations trumps advertising is because going through the third-party eye of the media adds more credibility. And yet, fast forward 30 years, and suddenly we are faced with the fact that the media credibility is disappearing very fast. And Japan is one of those markets as well. And I was at a discussion at the FCCJ, the Foreign Correspondents Club, the other day, and I was always expecting lightning and thunder like we saw tonight, because I asked this question of the journalist as to what do you do in that case? I don't think there is a clear path on that. But I did read something the other day that really intrigued me. It really intrigued me, and it's sort of related to when we think about the bigger picture of content marketing. It was a piece, it was a blog, and the person was saying, we need to throw the concept of earned media out the window for the reasons we've discussed. He said, it's really about earned attention. And this struck me, and I thought, wow, that is so prescient. It really is. Because the issue is, when I started out 30 years ago, you would say, I want to sell this bottle. And you say, oh, Mr. Tanaka over at the Nikkei likes bottles, so I'll give him a call, and he might be busy, and so you bring Mr. Yamaguchi over at the Asahi because his wife likes bottles. And it was very instinctive. Now, even if they wrote something, how do you get people's attention? How do you get people's attention? So I'm really actually quite intrigued by this concept of earned attention over earned media or any other stuff that we do. And that's where creativity, I think, plays a big role as well.
Yeah, I think that really kind of nicely segues into what I was wanting to talk about next, which is about storytelling. And this was also very important and kind of what we saw last year as well. It's good to see that, marketers think of storytelling as a very important, facet to or arsenal in their PR and marketing mix. But what do you need to do? What does it take to make your brand resonate here, especially in a B2B context, right? And to get that earned attention from the media?
I think from my perspective, it's always about trying to put yourself in their shoes, put yourself in the customer's shoes, understand what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and really trying to address and understand those concerns. I mean, we can tell the greatest story, but if it doesn't really matter or resonate with them or what they deal with on a day-to-day basis, it's just, why do I need to read this? So I think just always keeping the customer in mind, that's, at least to me, how to be more successful in the storytelling realm.
The thing I always say when the topic of storytelling comes up is that it is really important to make sure that we are focusing on the story and not the telling. Because so many people say, we're involved in storytelling, and you start talking to them about it, and they're actually talking about a social media platform. They're talking about the telling rather than the story. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss, and then they sort of sit there and say, why aren't our stories getting through? I think there's two parts to the story. The first one is you've got to grab people's attention. So how do you do that? And that is a very short form concept, and maybe it's even a visual rendering of that story. So people have to notice you first of all. So it's a headline, or it's a piece of social media, or it's a very short form, quick hit. The problem with that is once you grab people's attention, people have less attention than, a goldfish, people say these days. They're scrolling onto something else. So you have to then demonstrate the relevance or the importance of that story to them. And I think that really comes from research. And I don't think you can do effective storytelling unless you have a backbone of research in which gives you a better understanding of the audience, to your point, that you're trying to communicate with. If you can understand the audience better, you can understand what resonates with them. And then you think about that. I had this conversation today with someone who was talking about how we at Normal Response is something called FT Schools, which is providing the FT free to high school throughout the world. And they were talking about social media, and I said, I feel uncomfortable at this conversation because how can us, who are 50 and 60-year-olds, talk about, what's going to resonate with a bunch of teenagers in high school? So maybe the trick is we need to get them to create the content rather than us. So I think there's a few things going on here, but I think you've got to really concentrate on the story. You have to understand what's going to resonate with the audience, and that comes from research. So I think those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks. Another thing that we really dug into in the survey is around thought leadership. And last year we didn't really do much around thought leadership in the survey, but this year we did. And we were really quite surprised that actually it's kind of less of a priority here in Japan, although globally there seems to be a lot more focus on thought leadership. And it seems like something that teams struggle with globally, and all the more so, I guess, in Japan. So in your experience, what does real thought leadership look like, today? And how do you make space and time, when there's so many competing demands, storytelling, brand awareness, lead gen? You got to do all of this as a marketer, as a communicator. And the leadership team, the executive team is looking for thought leadership. How do we position ourselves in thought leadership? So there's this conflicting, challenges, and that's probably why we see less brands in Japan focusing on thought leadership because they don't have the time, I suppose. What are you seeing in your organizations or globally?
Well, I think about thought leadership, I think one important point is that to be real thought leadership, it has to be something that's unique or different, that not everyone else is saying or just rehashing what everyone else is saying. That's not really thought leadership. So I also wonder if there's kind of a cultural element at play too. Like, is there a little risk aversion to maybe, going outside of the fray a little bit and saying something that other people aren't saying? I think that could be a factor. But outside of Japan, we have a big emphasis on thought leadership, and not all of our executives are on board with it, but certain ones, they understand the importance of it, make time for it, and are realizing the benefits from it.
The sales process is one where you're going to have a direct salesperson going to see their contact within the company and trying to sell a product. And I think in a lot of organizations, not restricted to Japan, but particularly prevalent in Japan, there are a lot of people in the background who actually have a lot of input into that decision as to whether they will buy or not buy, but you never see them. They're hidden. And I know in our own organisation, right, we have people come and they'll meet with the executive in charge, but there's this whole group of other people who are going to have influence on that decision that the salesperson is never going to get access to, never going to get access to. And I'm sort of coming around to the thinking that the way to get to those people is through thought leadership, because you're never going to be able to demonstrate to them that you understand their pain points or you have something new to offer them unless you're getting that content to them. And then, of course, it comes to a delivery question and things like that. The other thing, and this is sort of related to the point that Stephanie raises, I think, you know, at Nomura now, we hire more lateral hires than we do graduate hires now. More, for the first time in our history, it was the first time ever. So which means that for the past, what's relevant, 40 years, we have been an organisation of generalists. Think about this. How do generalists do thought leadership? You need to have some sort of specialisation in sort of to get... So I think there's a fear, and we talk a lot at the moment about how do we get our executives to start talking about things other than our business results and what they're doing with the business strategy. You know, we should have the head of our global markets division talking about the impact of AI on capital markets around the world. But it's really quite challenging to get executives to that level where they feel comfortable. And I think they feel they feel uncomfortable because they think they're going to have to go somewhere and get asked questions that they might not be able to answer. You know, my argument against that is, no, if we create a platform for which you become very well known, one or two, you will only get questions on that, you know. And try and make their life easy, but it is a little bit of a challenge in Japan, I think, because of that generalist construct. But I don't think the importance of thought leadership is in any way less in Japan than it is perhaps in other areas. It's just that we're trying to catch up on the way to do it in the delivery. Yeah,
you pointed a really interesting trend there, and good to see Nomura kind of changing the hiring process from generalist to specialist, and I guess that's kind of be across the board in other companies in Japan?
Yeah, I think, at least in the finance industry, I know that our peers, all the major mega banks, all now employ more lateral hires than they do graduates. And it's simple mathematics. There's not that many graduates around anymore. You know, they're getting less and less every year. And so, and our business is becoming significantly more complex. And for that reason, we need people who are specialists. And, you know, in our case, now 50% of our business and 50% of our employees are outside Japan. So, you know, we're addressing different markets too, and that requires something different than just an entirely Japanese construct.
Yeah. Another major trend that we wanted to analyze in the report and the survey was around AI, right? And last year, we saw only 19% were using Gen AI, and over 50% were skeptical about the potential use of AI. Fast forward a year now, 73%? Yeah, 73% are using AI. You know, what has changed? You know, is it you got to do less with more, or is it good the tools themselves? What's happening? Why are marketers now adopting AI at rapid pace?
I think there could be a few factors. One being less is more. You know, there's always a lack of resources, a lack of time, you name it. So that's the never-ending challenge, I guess. But I think another part could be, you know, every day, at least in my inbox, every morning I read, you know, these newsletters and such, and something is talking about AI. So I think maybe there's a peer pressure factor as well, or people are, you know, understanding that other companies are adopting this, or their colleagues are adopting this, and if I'm not doing it, well, I'm falling behind. Or they're hearing, you know, the stories that, you know, if you don't understand AI, well, maybe your job is at risk. Maybe that's not as much of a factor here in Japan, but outside of Japan, certainly. So I think there's a few factors playing into it, but just Or maybe they're realizing, it really is more efficient, or it can make you more efficient and, take a 20-page PDF and summarize it in 2 seconds instead of spending 2 hours on it.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. When I look at our own experience, and I sort of, backtrack to a year ago and I think about where we were, there were a lot of conversations going on about AI and this wonderful new tool. And on the opposite side of the table, you had a whole contingent of people who were saying, but what about confidentiality? What about, other issues? What about ethical issues? And the way that those have been solved, and I think it's probably similar in a lot of companies, is we've created our own internal AI, which is, we call it NomuChat for Nomura Chat. It's a ChatGPT-based thing. And so it took us about sort of 9 months to actually get that online. Now that that's online and people have been given the license to go ahead and use it, I see people using it for all sorts of things. Even people who are very senior in the organization you would think would not normally be that technologically savvy. Sorry, boss. But they're actually using it as well. Not for deep use, but it's certainly an efficiency play. So I think probably what's happened is people have got more used to it. There has been more permission granted. And it'd be interesting to see next year's figures, because then we're going to see, I think, the opposite thing happen.
Yeah, that certainly. And I think AI proficiency is one of the top, tools or skill sets that, our survey has responded as where the future is and what they'll be investing in, right? And it's also good to see that human oversight, right? 80% said that human editors check the content before it gets published. But how do you balance speed with efficiency then, and keeping the content authentic, trying to achieve that storytelling, trying to, achieve thought leadership? Do you use AI for those, purposes, and then get human editors to check it? What's the process that you've been using, or you see that would be effective?
So in my team, we use it for certain tasks, not really the blogs or like thought leadership or anything like that. If it's more short form, like social media posts, things like that, that can be easily and quickly curated or edited, we do use it. But we still use it mostly for the ideation aspect, which I think it is really, really good. And even the writing, I would say it has improved a lot in 1 year. And really, the most important point is probably the prompting, too. Do you know how to prompt? If you just go with its first draft, it's not going to sound like a human, of course. So you have to know how to prompt it. But, we're using it for certain things, just not everything by any means. And anything we do use, someone is editing it. And that, I think, that was one of the most surprising things in the survey was, I think there was, 20% or a contingent of people that just kind of let it ride after you.
Right. I would expect to see 100% checking it, right?
Yeah, same.
All the same, basically. What's intriguing me at the moment, and I've got someone to start doing some work on this. When you're a big Japanese company, use an example, so we have to put out an annual report, right? And we put out an annual report, and if you read that annual report, it's written by 27 different departments. And you can clearly see that there are 27 different styles and tones of voice. And the example I use internally, as I said, and it would probably work with this audience at the moment, if I say the words to you, Goldman Sachs, everyone has an image which is probably pretty consistent of what Goldman Sachs is. And Goldman Sachs, when you look at the stuff that they put out, is really quite consistent in their tone. They never apologize for anything. It's always a very aggressive tone. But it's very consistent, whereas we're all over the place. We've got better. When I joined 4 years ago, our CEO's comment in the beginning of the thing was, I think, written by 3 different people because there were 3 different, very distinct styles in 2 pages. So my thesis is, if we can create the Nomura tone of voice and decide on what that Nomura tone of voice should be, which is, I think, a branding exercise in a sense, then we can get the AI to learn that. And then it doesn't really matter whether it's written by HR, finance, corp comms or whatever. We can just put it through and say, please put this into the Nomura tone of voice. And that immediately gives us consistency, which when you look at a lot of Japanese companies, one of the biggest issues with their branding is consistency, because they are very decentralized organizations. So I'm really intrigued about, it's sort of work in progress, we've just started, but I'm really intrigued to see the results and if that would really work for us.
That's really interesting indeed. Yeah, I think creating processes that are going to be streamlined that can help to improve productivity, but also keep consistent tone of voice is going to be interesting. Creative risk is another topic that we kind of looked into, and is AI good at being more creative, or is it just creating average content faster? Do you think creativity will boost as the AI tools get better? What are your thoughts on that? Or is it just putting out average content at speed?
I mean, there are certain things that can't emulate. It still can't get that emotion. So it kind of depends what your goal is. Like, I'm more on the communication side. So for internal communications, I would never use AI. Right, especially if it's a very sensitive communications. It doesn't understand, or it doesn't understand the customer's pain points, or things like that. If you're just looking for kind of a run-of-the-mill content, I think it's okay. But I mean, I think there's a lot of potential, right? We've seen in the past year just the dramatic change in quality. So I think it's only a matter of time, just maybe not at this moment.
This is a really tough one. This is a really tough one. And I don't really have a good answer. I had a fight with AI today, right? So I'd asked it for two things. I asked it to produce a ranking of GDP per head for the G20, because I'd seen somewhere that Japan's GDP per capita was the envy of all the G7 countries. And I looked at this piece of content and it was written last year and I thought, wow, that doesn't sound right. So I asked ChatGPT or NomaChat, I said, is this correct? Came back and said no. And I said, can you give me a ranking? And it gave me a ranking of the G20. And it was wrong. It had Australia up the top at 65,000, and then it had the number 2 was America at 70,000. It was clearly wrong. And so I went back to it and said, this looked wrong. And I got back, oh, thank you very much for pointing that out. And then there was something else I was asking it later on, and it also was wrong. And so I went back and I said, you've been wrong twice today. And I got this sort of platitude about, oh, thank you for pointing that out, really appreciate it. And I said, but come on, man, you were wrong. Aren't you going to admit it? And I'm just thinking, this is interesting, what's going to happen? And it eventually, oh, yes, you deserve an apology. And it was like talking to another human being. And when you think about that, it's actually quite creative. In the end, I got so frustrated with it. I said, can you provide data to me on how often AI is wrong? And it came back with a number of 70 to 80%. He said 70 to 80%. So I think that may be wrong too. But anyway, it was really like having a conversation with another human being. In a sense, that sort of impressed me. So I wonder, if I think about, if you have the research and you're thinking, okay, I need to create something creative, and you've got 4 or 5 different versions of that creative, and you're going to optimize it, there's probably a path for you to say, okay, here's the results of the research, which one of these is going to hit the best? Yeah. Okay, and I think it will probably give you an answer for that. If it can do better than that, if it can actually create the creative, personally, I think that's really scary. Really scary, and I don't think we'll get there because I think the human desire for creativity will move, and we'll think of different things as being creative. Yeah.
I just want to move to the challenges that marketers are facing with scaling content and keeping high quality at the same time. Have you found any systems, tools, or ways of working that helps your teams to manage just the sheer volume of content and the various platforms and channels that they need to put content out for?
I think one thing that we really try to do is repurpose the content in different formats as much as possible. So, if we make blog post, maybe we can turn that into a text social media post or an infographic, or if we make a video, obviously small cuts for that for social media. Just leveraging what you do have in as many ways as possible. That's probably the biggest tip I could give. But also just staying very focused. I mean, I think that's the hard part. Just trying to do everything or be everything to everyone. And the fact is, everyone's not reading everything anyway. So when you do get their attention, we have to make sure it's really high quality and focus on the things that are going to bring the most value.
I find this to be most challenging in our internal communications. We have half of our 27,000 employees outside Japan. I think we have an intranet system, an internal platform that is quite global in nature, and we try to make sure that we are putting up as much global content as we can from various parts of the organization. But it just never stops. There's always a queue of 100 different pieces of content that we have to get up there. And this is really beginning to concern me, because I can't go out and hire another 5 to 10 people that are going to be able to do that. And so we're sort of butting up against, so I've actually sort of tasked my guys to come up with some ideas as to how we can prioritize that content, because we're going to have to do that. So what are the rules and parameters around how we prioritize? And the second thing is, how can we find some convenient platforms to be able to do things in a different way, or tools that can help us sort of diversify a little bit out. And we are doing some stuff, but our experience has been there's no one tool that actually does everything for us, right? We've got some great video software, but the editing is quite hard, or the global sharing is quite hard. There's nothing out there that actually fills the gap. And to Stephanie's point, I think reuse is really, really going to be the name of the game. But it requires a different mindset when you're creating something. So if you're creating a 5-minute video that you're later going to be splitting up into 6 pieces of short form video, you have to take the audience on that emotional journey for each of those sort of, parts of those 6 parts. And so how you pull that together is a really, really complicated exercise. And I can see a day when we'll all be hiring people from Hollywood because they don't have jobs because of Netflix anymore, and we'll be doing sort of storylining in that way.
Yeah, I see that in B2C, they tend to do a good job of that, because there's a really good story, and they take the consumers on that journey, right? And it keep them attached. And even if you missed an episode or missed a segment, you'd want to go back and watch it because you want to know what happened. But in B2B, that's really challenging, right? Yeah. So, speaking of challenges, right, between tight, schedules, limited resources, and pressures that stand out, what's the one challenge that keeps you up at night, and how are you tackling that?
Well, I think for me, it's probably AI, really. I mean, we've seen significant impacts on our website traffic. All of our companies are seeing significant declines. And then also just, the way it's changing, the importance of whether it's owned or earned or whatever. It might change next week, we'll see. But just, the impact it's really having, and trying to understand what to do or what not to do, because it might change again. It's just, I don't know, it's, in my lifetime, I feel like I haven't seen something like this to this magnitude.
Lots of things concern me. The thing that keeps me awake at night, and sometimes I do get wakened at night because of it, is the malicious use of AI to create content that is in some way going to be damaging to us or our employees. Financial markets were quite good last year. At one point, we had, on Facebook, there were over 380 different ads featuring our CEO. For some reason, they'd gone and found a picture in some online magazine of our whole legal team with, I'm going to tell you the next stock that's going up 10 times. Click here, you get taken straight to a line, and it's a scam, and people are losing money. We have people, I mean, I would say at least half an hour of my day these days, every day, is taken up because someone has set up a website that represents to be us in India, or some other guy is trying to scam something, or there's some content out there that's malicious, or someone has posted on social media pictures of our employees, and these sort of safety issues and reputational issues are the sort of thing that keeps me up at night. That really does, because you go to the platforms. We had 380, and we went to the platforms and said, "Can you do something about this?" And they did nothing. They did nothing about it. And so, for a while there, we were clicking on the things and lodging complaints. I had 20 people clicking on things. We were like a click farm in Romania or somewhere. But yeah, it's. I just hope technology enables us to keep up with that.
Yeah, and that's really interesting what you say, because I was at a conference for independent agencies in London just a couple of weeks ago, and brand safety was one of the biggest challenges that as independent agencies globally we are facing. And because we represent clients, so we need to protect the client's brand, and that seems to be an area where, especially given the extent of content that AI can produce, and how do you manage that brand safety with the AI at scale that can create and disseminate information, is something that we need to keep an eye on, I suppose.
And it gets harder and harder to distinguish it. And there are examples of people have gone on video conferences with their CEO overseas and being told that this is a special project, please send $20 million to this bank account, and they've done it because they're in a meeting with the CEO and the CFO, and it turns out they weren't real. It's really, really worrying.
You touched upon this at the start, Ross. You said, let's imagine we're having the same conversation a year from now, right? What do you hope will be different for content marketers and the content marketing space in Japan? What do you wish for? What do you hope for?
The first thing, and it may be a little bit of a stretch target in a year, but some degree of clarity or a clear narrative around how AI is going to influence the way things are being picked up. So someone said something to me the other day, you don't want to write with AI, you want to write for AI. And I thought, wow, that's actually quite interesting, because when we talk in the language of SEO, for instance, now SEO is probably going to be obsolete. It's already getting obsolete. And so how do we, as a company and as an organization, start producing content what are the parameters for having a written piece that is going to be picked up better by AI? I know how to write for a journalist, I know how to write for a stakeholder, I know how to write for an internal audience, but do I really know how to do that? The other thing is, we put out a lot of research, right, as a financial institution, and there are 5% of people who really love our research and will read every single piece we put out, okay? There's 5% of people who probably really hate our research and will not pick it up. And then there's a big gap in between of people who, if they see something in the newspaper about a piece of research that Nomura has put out, they might go and look for it and read it. And that probably is repeated through the whole financial industry. I think what's going to happen is people aren't going to do that anymore. They're not going to have likes and dislikes. They're just going to gather every piece of research they can on the Chinese economy put out by 27 different banks, and they're going to put it into AI, and they're going to say, okay, tell me how this relates to my portfolio. Completely different dynamic from how we write research now. And I don't think there is clarity yet on what are the parameters in order to do that well.
And I think for me, I know earlier we were joking about it, but actually, very seriously, I think I would hope that 100% of people are checking the quality of AI. I mean, even I've tried to put together, not business case, more personal, and then the research it gives, I start asking questions about the sources it cites, and then, well, this is based on proprietary information. I don't have the real, actual data. Like, well, how am I supposed to present this to anyone and be seen as credible when you don't even have access to the real data. So I think it's just really important to manually check what you're seeing, whether it's a piece of content or citations, whatever. I mean, I just can't underscore the importance of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, because there's just ease of getting the information, trusting the information, doing a little bit of checking with it. Oh, it makes sense. It sound about right. And then you use the content. That's the biggest risk, right? And Russ mentioned earlier, you're moving from a world of SEO, search engine optimization, to what we call GEO in the industry now, or generative engine optimization, or Google has AI overviews, AIO. There's so many new terms that are floating. So we are starting to look at how do we create content for generative engine search to be found on generative engines, understanding user behavior, and understanding that, SEOs was pretty straightforward because it's all about keywords. If you know what your top keywords are, then you try to create content for that. You try to compete and outbid in terms of advertising for that. But with generative engine, you need to create conversational style content that the engines are reading and understanding, and then the users are asking more conversational type questions and follow-up questions, right? So that is creating an all new industry of digital marketers out there that's using AI engines to write AI content to try and do their work quicker. So it's interesting for us to see how we create content for generative engines and be found. I'm going to open it up to the floor to get some questions from the audience. So if anybody would like to ask a question, we do have a mic. We can get the mic and pass it around, maybe.
I think it's very interesting that you brought up brand reputation and how AI can probably affect that adversely. And I think that there is a flip side to that. With the prevalence of AI, aren't people going to want to know that some content is written by a real human, that it's quote unquote authentic? Authentic is the new indicator of value, is one of the things that's just been popping around in the back of my mind. What is your take on that?
I agree with you entirely. When I was a kid, my dad would buy the Sun newspaper in Melbourne, and it was a tabloid paper, it had lots of big pictures, and I used to say to him, Dad, that's not really intelligent. Intelligent people don't read the Sun because it's got lots of pictures. He said, no, son. He said, pictures are the only things you can't change. You cannot falsify a picture. In those days, in the 1960s, that was very true. And of course, then along comes Photoshop, and suddenly that credibility disappears. So what do? We look for authenticity and credibility, and we all go to video because, that's not so easy to change. But now I have something now on my iPad that allows me to edit video just in the same way. So where do we go next? And then we go to live streaming, right? Because that's got to be credible because you're actually looking at the person. And now we have this situation where AI can create a Ross Roberry sitting there doing a video that you can't tell apart from the real guy. So I don't know the answer to the question, but where do we go next? I mean, I think there is this inexorable desire by human beings to look for that authenticity. I think it is in the very nature of human beings to do that. And that's the journey we've been on ever since we sort of had my dad buying the newspaper with the photos because only the Chinese and the Soviets would change photos. I don't know what's next. I mean, I constantly sort of challenge myself to think about this, but I think, what's the next technology? How do you do that? Is there some technology that just the next stage, is it just, basically verifies the fact that it's a real video or something? So I'm totally in agreement with you about the issue of authenticity, but I don't know what the answer is.
I think what we're seeing is definitely, content producers and publishers need to, put credits where they're using AI before publishing content, right? And even the engines are starting to, like when you post something on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn algorithms kind of pick up if it's a content produced by AI and asks you to, tag that as created with AI. So I think we're seeing that in terms of images and video and visual content, but in terms of copy, it's difficult, right? There are engines out there now that can check the copy itself, whether it's written partially by AI or not, but I don't think it's accurate yet. But I think that's probably where we can find, hopefully find tools that can identify whether this copy was written 100% by a human or by AI. Yes.
If content is relevant to my needs, my wants, and gives me the answers I need, why do I care if it was written by a human or AI? Well, you said authenticity is so important, right?
Yeah, no,
But if I
no,
get what I want,
yeah,
why do I care?
It's a really good question. I think that there is an issue, as we've seen the growth of technology, right? The other thing we've been seeing that happening in society is there has been a dissolving of trust, right? In organization, dissolving in trust in what is written. And the fact is that no one, you know, we have people out there saying, these are my facts, or, you know, these are your facts. And so this whole construct of what is true, what isn't true, what is a fact, what is an untruth, all has its genesis in the fact that for some reason, you know, society now just has less trust in things. So if you're a very trusting person and you're saying it doesn't really matter to me whether it's written by AI or whether it's written by, it's fine, it serves my purposes, I don't see anything wrong with that. But I think the majority of people are going to say, this might have been written by AI, can I trust it? Right? Because there is that default to not trust stuff at the moment, and that's where the authenticity thing comes in, I think is really, 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 really important. Obviously, you know, I'm a gaijin here in Japan. I do translation from Japanese, and I'll take my translation, and I think I've done very well because I've been here a long time. But perhaps because I've been here a long time, sometimes it's a little bit wonky maybe, and I put it through, you know, the AI, and I say, can you just rewrite this? And it comes up with something which is much better than what I wrote. So, and I think, well, why would, you know, what's wrong with that? You know, and if I put that up in LinkedIn, why should LinkedIn flag that as not having been written by me? It was originally written by me, it's just made better. So it's a really, really complex and interesting area that I think is going to develop those narratives. But I think there is an issue of trust in there, or just general distrust that's coming through.
Well, I think there's this debate every day on LinkedIn too, for anyone that's on there about AI content or not. And, you know, I think there's the same consensus. Some people care, some people don't. I mean, for me personally, if the post is good, it's interesting, I don't really care if it's written by AI. But I mean, that's just social media. But if I'm trying to look up some, I don't know, like a diagnosis for a health issue or something, I might, like, you know, I might not trust it as much. So it's kind of depends on what the content is too. But if you're fine with it, then, you know, I don't see any issue with that either. There's a lot of people like that out there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it really depends on from what perspective are you looking at the content, whether it's for your personal consumption, to make your personal decision, versus in a B2B context, it's if you're consuming that content to make a decision for your business and for your stakeholders, then definitely you need to pay attention to it and understand whether it's true or not, or whether it's going to impact your business, because you're going to be seen as the one that's, you know, recommended or put forward the content or the ideas to your supervisors and, you know, the higher ups, I suppose. So it really depends on what angle you're taking it from, I guess. Thank you. Good question. Any other questions? The one with the mic has the question.
Turning it on. Oh, yes. Now, sound. Okay. We had a discussion about who's going first. I think that AI is a tool, right? And as every tool, the question is how you use it. AI will lead to, and is already leading to, an explosion of content. There's more and more and more stuff out there, and everyone is more and more living in their own bubble, meaning everyone has his own interpretation of reality. We don't have agreement anymore what is reality, because it depends on what kind of information we're getting, and it depends on the algorithm, and so on and so on and so on. I think that leads to the question about companies having a point of view. It's not about what AI is putting together, it's a matter of what am I representing, what kind of interpretation of reality is this company offering me. This is where authenticity is coming in. It doesn't matter who's writing it, it's about what does it represent to me. Now, I think this might be, and I think you mentioned it earlier, a challenge for especially Japanese companies. Because having an opinion, I think, will become more and more important. Is about how do you, what's your point, what's your take, and how is that take consistent over time in how you represent it? How do you think this whole discussion about how easy or difficult it is to put something out there will actually challenge companies to have more and more of an opinion? Because, you know, the speed of how you present something or you produce something will go faster and faster and faster. It's not just alignment of how the tone of voice is right, but it's alignment in terms of, is that opinion actually reflecting the company?
Do you have a question? It's a really good opinion. And how do we view that?
Okay, let's turn this into a question. How do a particular Japanese company deal with this within Japan and outside and the rest of the world?
Well, I think from my perspective, I think there's still a lot of hesitancy to be the first to really take a different opinion or be bold in a claim. I mean, we do that outside of Japan, no problem, regularly. But I don't know when that turning point will happen in Japan or if it ever will. I don't know. There's still so much aversion to really being bold. So I don't have a good answer for this one, but I just feel like it's going to be kind of a tough road from what I see. But I'm at, a very traditional Japanese company. In my understanding, other companies are a little bit more progressive, or if they're Western companies with Japanese branches, I think they're willing to do more. So I think there's some nuances between the different companies. But speaking from the traditional Japanese company, I don't see it happening anytime soon.
That construct on authenticity, I think, is really interesting and compelling. So you look at the receding trust and credibility of the mainstream media, and then yet you look at, particularly in the United States, the phenomenon of people like Tucker Carlson, right, who have millions and millions of videos. They're really, really popular, and there are, 5 or 6 of these people that you might call them influencers, you might call them media. And I think the attraction of those to the listeners or the readers is that they have a very clear stance. You know what you're going to get when you go there. And so your point about that being important, I think, is really, really compelling. When I look at the need for companies to do it, I think there is a little bit of a cultural overlay. So you will get Japanese companies, and we were very active. Our volume was extremely high for a Japanese company on DEI and diversity being a major pillar of the creation of corporate value for us. But did we want to get involved in Gaza and in Israel? No way, because 50% of our employees in New York are Jewish, and 50% of our employees in EMEA are Islamic. So how can you win? And I think what's happening in the world at the moment is that companies began to think, we've got to take a stance, we've got to be out there, we've got to be public, and that was encouraged. And then suddenly Donald Trump came along, and now everyone's absolutely terrified to say anything about DEI, and they're coming up with all different constructs, and let's just talk about influence. So I actually think that this whole thing about taking a stance is in backtrack at the moment. And it'll settle down somewhere that companies will feel comfortable, but I don't think they actually know what that comfort zone is yet. But my view of this is it doesn't matter what the decision is, the companies have to own that decision. So if you decide that you are not going to use DEI anymore, you need to own that decision. You need to explain it to employees. You need to explain it to your stakeholders. If you're going to still go on with it, then you need to obviously do the same thing.
Thank you. One last question.
Thank you. So I've just come from the MarTech Summit in Hong Kong just 2 days ago, and it's actually somewhat striking to see the difference in tone because the vast majority of conversations in Hong Kong were all about AI, and the vast majority of questions, the keynote was all about AI. And I think that the person over here raised an interesting and perhaps valuable point. It doesn't matter necessarily where the content comes from, as long as it is valuable or it is perceived to be valuable. And I actually asked a question of the keynote speaker in Hong Kong about what do you do with the reality that a lot of AI might be hallucinating something, just like your experience. You said you had a fight with AI this morning. And yet, I see some hesitation or maybe an assumption of apprehension or hesitation here, despite the fact that AI happens and continues to happen, and we'll see more and more of it. Everyone seems to be in agreement of that. So my question is, if I could ask the panelists to put yourself in an optimistic mood, what would you like to see from AI in the future, given that it is happening, and maybe whether or not the executives say it's going to go a certain way or they want their companies to respond a certain way, it will affect the site traffic, and it will affect the way that people are viewing your brand. So what would you like to see? What effects would you like to have if you could be optimistic?
I can go first. Okay, so let me sort of think about this as I answer. I think the first thing is obviously the efficiency issue. And the benefits that it gives to efficiency in work and productivity. And we spoke a little bit before about how one of the challenges we all face is just how do we get the resources and the time to be able to produce all the content that we need to do. And so I think there is a real big benefit, and we're already seeing it, to that sort of thing. The other thing that I did mention this last year, is my organization is an organization of generalists, so I've got people sitting in the corporate communications who have never done corporate communications before, and this was a real struggle. But what I see now is they go on and they ask AI for a solution. AI will give them a number of different options, and so it's actually fast-tracking their learning experience, and I think that is really important as well. And I think that, and Stephanie mentioned this a little bit earlier, I think, having AI prompt creativity is going to be really essential. Because that is something that is going to we're going to have to produce content at ever-increasing speeds. And so how do we actually, it's not going to be, I need to sit down for 6 weeks and work on this piece of content. It's going to have to contract it, and there will be elements of that we can contract with AI prompting the thinking of how we're doing. So I think that, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be a Luddite. I think that there is great potential for AI. I think that in Japan at the moment, Japan culturally is a little bit hesitant for anything it doesn't really understand. It's not conservative. It just doesn't really like the unknown, and until things become known, you don't see that movement forward. And I think that's where we are at the moment. Yeah, I'm actually quite optimistic about AI, but there are challenges as we adjust on how we use it.
And for me, I think I would really love for it to take away a lot of the grunt work, or even, the creating PowerPoint presentations. Like, I feel like when I walk through the office every day, half the people are making PowerPoint presentations, or so many reports we have to do, or, just a lot of that stuff that takes so much manual labor. And then they can, we can reallocate their efforts to something more productive to actually help move the company forward. And I know we can do a little bit of that right now, but it's not perfect, of course. but I would love to see, us get to that point where we can focus on bigger picture things and not the mundane.
Yeah, and as an agency owner and operator, for me, if AI can help us to, protect our creativity, protect our IP, is going to be key because, we run the risk of using AI and, inadvertently giving away our IP or our IP. It's generating the ideas, but we are prompting it to create that idea. So that's typically the creation process that happens in our own minds, in our own teams. So we want to do it at pace, and that's why we are trying to go to AI. So that's the risks. So sometimes we feel that we need to not engage with AI to keep that IP and creativity in-house. So we'll have one last question, and then we'll wrap up for dinner.
Yeah, Ross and Stephanie, thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to ask you a real question at the start. So Ross, you mentioned that you're using the Nomura large language model. You've actually put together your own. Have you, everybody's concerned about the accuracy of AI. It kind of hallucinates, it does its own things. You both mentioned that as well. Have you had experience with retrieval augmented generation, like a RAG AI, your own private AI? And if so, is that different than the LLM that you're using in Nomura, or Stephanie, you're probably using something like GPT or an LLM. Have you had the experience of using something like that? Or, and maybe I'm a little bit of a specialist in there. Do people know what the RAG AI is? Who does? Okay, what is that, Carl? Okay. So a RAG AI just means that a large language model is trained on the entire internet, and it will answer based on, it has to give you an answer. And if it even doesn't know the answer, it will hallucinate an answer. A RAG AI is only based on what you've uploaded, and so it will only give you an answer based on what you've uploaded. That's the big difference. So that's why I was asking, do you have this issue with accuracy within RAG AI, or have you used a RAG AI?
I can't really answer the question because I don't know whether what we are using is a RAG AI or some other type of thing, so it's just not my technical area. We have two that we use. We use what we call NomoChat, which is a chat GPT thing that we have in Japan, and then we have something which we call Chino. We gave it a Japanese name that we use outside Japan. And I think they're essentially the same system, but I don't know.
You'll probably know it because that RAG AI is only limited to a number of people, and it's trained on a specific set of data. So, and if you're not sure, maybe you're using the general LLM. But Stephanie, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I know within Hitachi, some of the different companies have their own AI. I don't know enough about it either. We're pretty much using the LLMs.
Okay, so that's one way that a lot of the large companies are trying to deal with accuracy issues, is trying to create their own private AIs. Yeah.
Makes sense. I know that globally, financial regulators are absolutely paranoid about the way that any financial institution deals with information and potential for leakage of that information outside, and that's why we've had to construct something that is only used within Nomura and ring-fenced and everything like that. But whether the input into that is just purely Nomura information or not, I don't know. I know there has been some large-scale uploading of particular information of Nomura, like our employee rules and everything like that, but whether it's just limited to that, I have no idea. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephanie and Ross, for another invigorating conversation this evening. And thank you everyone for attending. I hope the panel discussion was of interest.